welcome everybody to another episode of our podcast. We have some very interesting guests always on our podcast, and this particular week is no exception. We have Helen Amery and Sarah Priestley, who have written a wonderful book, which we're going to be discussing more about. Actually, you've written a couple of books. I see on the website. There's two different books. It's the Complete Guide of Awakening is what we're going to be talking about today. Is that right?
Yeah, the Complete Book of Awakening. Yeah, absolutely.
Complete Book on Awakening. So welcome.
I'm glad you spotted the title, the top part, Rishad, because somebody only saw Awakening. Awakening's like right across the middle, isn't it? And one person thought that was the title, just Awakening.
Okay.
So yeah.
So welcome to both of you. I believe you're in cold England, outside of London
Yes.
somewhere.
Yeah, so I'm about the Midlands. Yeah, we've got lots of snow here today.
Yeah. I'm in Cape Town in South Africa, and we had 2 days of overcast weather, and we got depressed from the weather. And today is bright and sunny, and I thought, I don't think we could ever live in the UK, because you wait for this great winter to finally crack open, and then finally spring arrives, and we're so spoiled in Africa. We've got 300 days of sunshine on average, and so it's so easy to get gloomy. But I believe that people that live in these Western climates have to have a more resilient approach to be able to weather out the weather through the winter. So it's a very different type of psychology as well, because the weather does play a huge impact. So welcome, Sarah, and welcome, Helen, first of all. You have a very interesting topic and book to discuss on, and we've had Katrine Oosthuizen, I think that's how you say it as well, on a podcast, and that was very popular. She brought a lot of wisdom around the concept or idea. I don't know what. There's so many difficult words to mention here, but in a non-dual understanding. Again, every word that I use very subjectively, because I've been on a journey myself, and wrote a book as well, which talks about similar types of topics. And yet there's a lot of links between various teachings, principles, and ideas, religions, spiritualities, knowings across a wide spectrum. And I think it's a really important concept to take further. So could we start off with, I don't want to touch on the topic of awakening yet, but maybe if we could, either Sarah or Helen, talk about your journeys into yourselves and into experiencing life, and where you ended up. If that's a good way to start, or whatever else you want to start off with, you're welcome to say as well.
Yeah, do you want to start this time, Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to say it's always such an interesting question, because I never quite know how I ended up here. My whole life seems to have been sort of just like following like the next thing that showed up, one thing after another, So I ended up, for example, I did a master's in IT. Everybody thought I was going to do a postgrad in human resources, personnel management, but the opportunity showed up, and I just pivoted at the last moment, and that led to the problem. My first career was a very corporate consulting IT thing, but I'd always loved anatomy, and I was working ridiculous hours for me anyway, so 70 hours in the office every week, so I couldn't do an evening class, which I'd done before, so I found a weekend class, but it happened to be taught by a massage school who wanted to teach you massage, so I learnt massage, and it turned out I loved it. And eventually managed to get made redundant from IT, which takes a long time in this country. When you really want to get made redundant, it seems to take a long time. And started a massage business teaching. Then I added in teaching Pilates. So I kept feeling like I was moving then towards like actually sort of what motivates people, I guess. Like the basic principles that motivate people. Because with the massage, people kept showing up with the same thing every single week. And the Pilates gave them the tools to start to look after their body in a different way. But you could still see that people's underlying belief systems or their motivations were keeping them stuck. And so I think that sort of naturally evolved into coaching sort of by accident, because I'm quite bossy. And the whole non-dual conversation, I just fell into sideways. I don't think I realised I was there till I was. But then it made sense of just like my belief systems. It made sense of my experiences and how I'd operated in the world up to then. So I think it was a very natural evolution, but it gave me a language and a paradigm, a worldview that made sense logically for me.
All right. So Sarah, if I could just ask further, you mentioned about your career path and how it led to almost a career in coaching, which then led to a more of an understanding. Has there been a yearning inside of you? It's a question that I seem very, that is very common amongst people that venture into, rather than the career or in the world, it's more of an inward journey, right? So that along the lines, there would have been an inward desire or yearning to uncover yourself, the world, making sense of all of that. Has there been always this yearning to uncover the truth, if you want to call it that?
I think so, but kind of at every level, because I was definitely the kid who took apart the toys that were meant to be indestructible and then looked at all the pieces. I didn't always put them back together, but yeah, so I think I've always, and I'm certainly the kid who, if you said, don't touch that, it's hot, I'd touch it 3 times in different ways to find out exactly how hot and exactly what damage it would do to me. So I think I've always wanted to just to understand, and I've not particularly liked platitudes or cliches or taking somebody else's word for it, or things that only work up to a point. I've always liked logic. I've always liked things to make sense across different levels of conversation as well.
All right. That's interesting. So we'll take that further as we go along. Yeah. What about you, Helen?
Yeah, so mine, it was similar to Sarah's in that I started off with a corporate career, but different in that mine became a bit more of a rude awakening. So not I know that some people have very extreme experiences when they first life first confronts them and says there's something else available. Mine was it was definitely uncomfortable. So there were having been in corporate, I'd left and started my own business already in coaching, and particularly around culture and leadership. And then it was 2017 when some relationships started going downhill. I noticed how grumpy I was with my kids, and it just didn't make sense. So I guess kind of in the same way with what Sarah's been saying there, which in that I hear that curiosity and that inquisitiveness. There was just that question of, well, why is my life like this? If I've been doing all this work on myself, I've been doing all this psychology-based development, I've been working on changing my thinking, improving my thinking, positive psychology. So why am I behaving in unhelpful ways in these relationships? Why am I being like this with my kids? And that was the question, that the primary question that came up was, or the thought even, that the statement was, there must be something else. There must be something else going on that this psychology stuff isn't tapping into. And so that led me into a book on Buddhism, but a very, very stripped back version. So I've never been one for religious dogma and trappings. So I really loved this book because it was the absolute simplicity, the most simple way probably you could ever express the Buddhist understanding. And I could feel, I knew there was something in that, something that it felt like coaching beliefs on steroids was kind of the phrase that kept coming to mind. It's like, oh wow, there's another level available. So that then led me into I did some transcendental meditation actually around then, and that was a big shift. So that it felt like a big clearing of a lot of gunk out of my system and a lot of settling down. And so from that, I'd already noticed how much my experience changed. The more slowed down I was, how much a nicer person I became. But then that almost became like an addiction. That it then was like, oh my God, well, I've got to keep meditating or else I'm going to be horrible again. So So I then came across a guy called Piers Thurston, who I don't know if you know. He's
met him.
So I heard him on a podcast, and I was like, I was literally crying with, oh my goodness, it sounds like he's talking about that essence of Buddhism I'd read about, but he's doing it in such a normal way. He sounds like a normal person. Again, with my, like, I don't want to be in any weird, wacky, woo-woo stuff, was my stance at the time. So I was just delighted that I came across somebody who sounded like a normal human being, inverted commas, obviously, around that. So I began working with Piers, and within, when did we start? The August? Yeah, I think it was within a few weeks, I had a big awakening. So a whole bunch of conditioned stories fell away, and I was left with this blissful, happy Cheshire Cat experience for a few days and a very quiet mind for a few months. But then it came back. So by early 2019, some of the psychological patterns had started to creep back in again. The mind had started to use the understanding almost like a rule. You know how it loves to do that, and yeah. So that then has led me into, so since then, a big exploration from the three principles to non-duality and a bunch of stuff in between. But really a deepening and deepening and deepening of my own understanding, as well as clearing up psychology along the way, clearing up conditioning along the way. So yeah, and life getting ever easier and nicer and less effortful. So kind of all the stuff that my meditation, that transcendental meditation, was designed to achieve, that slowed down state, it's now that slowed down state is just the ground of everything. And kind of like it made me think actually when you were saying about the weather, Rishad, you know, I quite enjoy the variety of the weather we get here. And I think that for me is a metaphor for life. It's like, with the ground of stable being, you can enjoy the ups and downs more. You can enjoy the snow and the storm and the sun more, because it's just part of the richness of the experience.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful, wonderful exploration, and I think that would then indicate what it seems to me like you went on a quest or on a journey to find inner peace. Stop me if I'm wrong here. Inner peace, contentment, joy, happiness, and those types of primary needs that we as human beings, and both of you are coaches, so you know when we're dealing with clients, that's ultimately what they want. It's something beautiful that Rupert Spira said, that ultimately what we're searching for is happiness, right? Is as much as we term it this, that, and the other. And I'd like to ask you this question, either of you. What is the definition of happiness?
Yeah, you know, this one's interested me, not least because there's a couple of researchers who sort of redefine happiness to get the result they want from it, which is always fascinating when that happens. But for me, it's become a useful word for a whole spectrum of different ways of expressing that same inner contentment, inner peace, inner sense of security and trust and wholeness. But also to be really clear that there are different expressions. One person will be, you know, a quite effervescent joy, and another person will talk about it as silence. And so I tend to use the word as just a catch-all term for everything from gentle peace right through to exuberance. But all of them founded in that inner expression, as opposed to that sort of outer search or outer acquisition. But it's not the perfect word.
What does it feel like for you personally, arriving at happiness to you? What does it mean, like, rather than the terminology? Would you be able to describe that feeling? And it's probably not the word happiness. The word is probably, like all words, they don't do justice. But how does that feel when you've achieved that, or momentarily achieved that feeling?
Oh no, I wouldn't say it was momentarily by any stretch. I'm slightly unusual in a sense that the kind of happiness that kids tend to experience, I never really lost it. So I can have the biggest tantrums over the smallest thing, and 5 minutes later I won't remember what it was about. So for me, I'm slightly hypermobile in my joints, and I'm slightly hypermobile probably in my emotions as well. So for me, if I strip it right back down, it's just this... It's just an isness. I can't put it even more than that. It's just a sense of not even certainty. It's more than that. It's just something that's utterly reliable, utterly complete, to the level where I don't need to... I can be really curious and explore it, but I don't need to challenge it, because there's nothing that all the curiosity has ever found that contradicts it. So for me, it's something, it's very fundamental and it underlies everything else, but it's distinctly not something that ever really comes and goes. Even in my biggest,
very nice, yeah,
biggest emotional reaction to anything in any direction, it's just... But I think that it's kind of unusual to have that, and it's probably just a weird combination of things that happened at certain ages that meant my life worked that way, and some of them quite big and some of them quite traumatic. And it's much more normal for people to go through from the age of 8 to 9, and certainly through puberty, to start to get a sense that that security or that happiness is in the future or outside of themselves. And a lot of our different cultural themes teach us that. Mm-hmm. So I think just because I'm pig-headed enough not to buy into things all the time, I do. I'm good at falling for bad stories, but I never bought into that one. I never bought into the idea that it was outside myself. And then when I look back, the books that kind of littered my childhood and the events and the timings, it kind of makes sense why. I accidentally had the support of Terry Pratchett novels, and those books show a really deep understanding of life and truth that you might think I would have been better finding in a religious text, but it's just, it happened that way. But I know that my experience isn't the most common, and so a lot of the journey for me has been understanding that my experience is different to a lot of people's paths, and so especially in the coaching world, to really come to terms with that and to see how I was starting with that fundamental sense of okayness, and that the people I was talking to were starting with a fundamental sense of not okay, need to protect, need to promote, need to work on myself. I'm not a work on myself kind of person. I'm a go to sleep and assume it'll all have sorted itself out in the night kind of person.
Okay, wonderful. I like it. Very original. What about you, Helen? What is happiness to you?
I kind of feel drawn to start with the fact that I was one of those people who was in the I'm not okay camp. But which was cool.
I'm sure Sarah started out there, right, Sarah? Wouldn't you have started?
No,
you've always been that way, that everything's okay, sort of.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that's the distinction, absolutely. Yeah, so I absolutely lost sight of that in the chase for finding okayness somewhere else, finding okayness somewhere outside of me. And I think okayness is probably the word that I get why Rupert talks about happiness and we talk about happiness, but I think okayness for me is sometimes a more accurate description of what becomes available through an awakening exploration, because it is just that I'm okay, I'm content. And actually that was the phrase that came out of my mouth when I'd had that initial big awakening. The words I'm okay just kept coming and coming and coming, and it was like, it felt like we talk about something being in our bones. It was like an in my bones understanding which I guess had always been there, but had been very hidden by all the seeking outside, all the, well, if I get that job, if I get that promotion, if I get that partner, that number of kids, that much money, all that stuff that we do in a desperate attempt, if I could just be a different person, then, maybe then I'll be okay. So my exploration was very much innocent, invisibly, like I didn't know that. I was absolutely following the storyline that Sarah didn't buy into. I was absolutely following that storyline of, oh, one day I'll do all the right things out there, or I'll do the right amount of work on myself, that then I'll be okay. And so that big initial shift was the return, the remembering to the fact that the okayness was already here. Nothing needed to change in the outside world for that okayness to be felt and known, so deeply known. And really from that point, it never left me. So it sometimes got covered over a bit more than others as I went on the journey. But really it just couldn't be shaken again. It couldn't, no challenge ever looked quite as convincing as it had done prior to that. And then over time, that sense of the okayness has grown, become more foreground, and the increasing grace and ease with challenges has increased, because when that's your ground, when that's what you essentially are, nothing in the world can fundamentally disrupt, or certainly can't take that away from you. Nothing. That's the, as Sarah said, that's the permanent, that's the reliable, and that is what everyone's looking for. So, like you said at the very beginning of that, with Rupert saying, yeah, everything we do is in the hope that I'll be happy as a result of it. And when we turn that inward and see, oh no, that happiness I'm trying to achieve through that thing, through that activity, through that person, through that food, whatever it is, oh no, that's here. Now let me see what I want to do in the world. Now let me see who I want to hang out with. Because we'll still have preferences. We'll still have some people who make us traditionally happier than others. So we'll want to hang around with them more. That's fair enough. That's normal. That's human. But the difference is, and Sarah again touched on this before, the difference is where that's coming from. If that's coming from that ground of okayness, there is actually more freedom to then go, oh yeah, I like this stuff and not that stuff. Rather than, oh my God, but I've got to do that stuff because somebody told me I should, and I'd better, because then that's apparently going to make me happier, and it's apparently going to make me a better person. All of that is the suffering that covers over the happiness that we are.
Okay, so that leads on to the topic. If I could ask you, so how did you arrive at this okayness? What was the process? Because I'm assuming the book talks in that line about arriving, and I'm guessing it happened through a personal journey, or was it an outside understanding that you put into the book about the process to arrive at this okayness?
So yeah, it's interesting. The process that's gone into the book is a culmination of both of our explorations, but from a very practical perspective. So my journey has included, so working with peers was very disruptive to the ego. So essentially what he did was shake my world up like a massive snowstorm until my mind couldn't figure it out anymore. And then in the inability to figure it out, the mind fell away like a crash. And that's what revealed the okayness. That's what reminded me that okayness was within me and not outside. And then everything else I've done has been, well, various different routes and explorations and inquiries and, yeah, loads of different stuff. And when I came to September, oh golly, Sarah, 21? Yeah, about September 21. Yes. I'd had the realization, the full realization of that nature of ourself. And I also recognized how most of what I'd done had been hints or suggestions. Most of the teachings I'd heard had been hints or suggestions or metaphors or stories, and beautiful, lovely words pointing to the fact that my essential nature is what I'm looking for. Lots of lovely pointers towards the transience of all of this content of life. But I realised through that there'd been some drops of practical explorations, of practical, well, do this and check what you find. And so in September 21, when I'd come to this full realisation, I was like, oh, that's the book to write. There's a book here that's inviting the reader to check for themselves. So like Sarah's just said about her growing up, it was always checking for herself. Like, if somebody says it's hot, well, let me just check. Let me just test that out. And for my own, like, if I see it for myself, then that's going to have a bigger impact than a parent telling me don't touch it. So it's kind of the same thing. I realised the impact that the practical explorations had on me through my process, and how that then had me go, oh yeah, I know it for myself. I don't need to rely on a teacher. I don't need to rely on somebody else's nice words. I've seen it for myself. I've explored and I've checked, and I've seen it, and I see the truth of it. I see the logic behind it, and I see the extrapolation. Therefore, if that is true, then that's what this means. And so this book became a culmination of all those kinds of explorations that we've both picked up along the way, because we want people to know for themselves. We don't want them to have to hope that Helen and Sarah are saying something that sounds really nice. Golly, I really hope that that's my essential nature as well. Golly, I really, wouldn't it be lovely if I could just trust in what Helen and Sarah or any of the teacher is saying, then maybe I'll feel okay as well. We didn't want that. We want people to know that for themselves, like truly know it for themselves. And these practical explorations, in our experience, seem to be the most impactful way of doing it. Similar to Katrin's in her book as well. That again is an invitation of, no, check it, test it, experiment with it, see it for yourself. Don't rely on somebody else's words. Don't hope or wish or think I've got to have faith and trust. No, that might help you at the beginning, but get in there, get exploring, get experimenting. So that was really the whole premise of the point of writing the book, to put that power back in the individual's hands and make it accessible, free of dogma, free of any spiritual teaching or religious understanding, right to the essence of, well, what is it we're looking for? And let's just go looking for that. Let's just find that and know it for ourselves.
Yeah, and it's not only an ancient classical teaching method to ask questions and to let people explore it for themselves, but my second postgrad is teaching adults, and at that time I was doing it as a massage teacher. And you can give people a bit of language, and you can give them a framework, and you can give them some academic things about how we describe the body and muscles and systems, and they can be really clever, but there's no actual alternative for them putting hands on a body and feeling how it moves, and feeling the difference between a damaged muscle and a healthy muscle, and feeling the difference between restriction and freedom, and feeling the difference between strength and weakness. And they can only work that out for themselves, because I can't tell the nerve endings in their fingers. And it's the same with Pilates. Pilates, when it's taught right, is a very inner journey. It's a very much finding your own strength, your own opposition, your own resistance. It's about expanding to fill your space. It's about feeling yourself into the exercises. And in fact, when I used to help teach Pilates teachers to pass their exams, and when they knew the book, they would have a client holding their breath, standing in a very strange position while they recited from memory everything they knew. And when they were ready for the exam, they'd say, feel how your hips open up in this movement and come back down. And the difference in terms of what you learn when you're taught in that exploratory way, when you've got a little bit of the background knowledge, it tends to create something that isn't just useful for exams, but is actually something that people make their own. So there's a logic to teaching that way as well.
So it's wonderful that your feedback and your journey is very much authentic in the book that came about, and it seems like a wonderful exploration. And there are many books out there on the topic, and many teachers teaching the topic. I always had this question that if we didn't use our minds to arrive at this sense of happiness, okayness, and all the rest of it, would we ever be able to arrive that without thinking logically about the ultimate nature of truth, reality, our natures, and all the rest of it? Is there another way? Other than a book, other than a process through logic?
Is there another way other than following a book? Yeah, because we're
not just a book. I mean, following, because the book is applying logic. It's saying, for instance, go in, examine if this is true for you, leading you down a set of questions. What you mentioned, what Pierce did, Helen, is wonderful. Is like just using your mind and your logic to say, well, is that really true? And then almost taking your same mind into a sort of a spin, saying, well, if that doesn't make sense, and does this make sense? And then you probe further, which comes at this majestic understanding, which is profound and extremely beautiful. This is just a general question that maybe you've pondered or not pondered. I mean, you're obviously following the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, but not 100% strictly. I'm assuming there's some kind of differences in the approach. But if we didn't have that approach of logic, of thought, of rational understanding, which takes you to a profound place, would we be able to arrive at a similar place by another means?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, because a baby can be happy, right? Fundamentally happy. They scream when they need something dealt with, and then they're happy again. So we know it's our essential nature. It's not something that we have to acquire, even through a book that is more exploratory based. And we know that people who have no interest in spirituality have spontaneous awakenings as well. And we know that whilst we've been very definite to write, sure, and yeah, of course this is taught in a lot of Buddhist teachings, and of course this is taught thousands of years ago in the Advaita Vedanta, it's the same teaching, but we didn't want to put it within one religious tradition, because we want to respect everybody's religious tradition. And we've both worked with people from all kinds of different cultural or belief systems, or none, in terms of religion. And one of the most beautiful things is when somebody actually comes into like a deeper relationship with their own heritage or their own religion, with this understanding, compared to us saying, oh, well, if you believe what we're saying, you must be Buddhist, you must be Hindu, you must be Christian mystic, because none of that's true. But the truth that we're looking at is so fundamental that it seems to enhance people's engagement with life, and whatever communities they're in, it has the potential to let people deepen in those, not reject them.
What about you, Helen?
I think like Sarah said before, about how Sarah herself has had that knowing of that okayness, that happiness all through life. And so in fact it's testament to your curiosity, Sarah, I think, that you then came into an exploration about it, because I think many people who will have that okayness and contentment and just know it as their standard wouldn't necessarily even then go exploring, because that's just their norm. And like Sarah had to have that journey to realize, oh, that's not everybody's experience. For many people, they'll just be living in that okayness with no awareness that that's not how everybody experiences life. And that's why some people, when they come into this exploration, I've seen it particularly in groups where it's not been, where they've perhaps, an organization has chosen for them to be in the conversation rather than them personally choosing it. And they can hear this understanding and go, oh, well, yeah, that's my experience already. And it's a comfort, I guess, in a way. It's a helpful understanding to realize that what the non-dual teaching is pointing to is exactly what they've felt their whole life. So absolutely, some people will just live as this already. They'll, like Sarah, they won't have got lost in the story of society. They'll have stayed with that background, knowing.
That's the one level of it, which is very clear that that it is our nature, like Sarah says. My question is more of that. Say I am in that state of not being aware of my essential nature, and I want to arrive at that place. And the one method would be the book and the structure and the inquiry, the self-inquiry through the mind in arriving there. My question is more of, not that I know it already, that I don't know it. Would there be another way that would take us to that, not understanding, maybe a knowing would be a more appropriate, that's the nature of my question.
Yeah, sure. So I think, like, then Sarah said about spontaneous awakenings. So sometimes people will awaken for no reason, seemingly no reason. It'll just happen. Other people might have a crash in their life. Steve Taylor's written a book called Extraordinary Awakenings, which is very much about people who've been right at rock bottom and who've had an awakening. What's really helpful is if those people then find somebody like us who can support them in the integration of that, because sometimes those sudden awakenings can drop you right into it, and it's brilliant for a while. But then in the same way that my mind came back after my few months of quiet mind, and mine was dramatic, but it wasn't that dramatic. But people who have a really dramatic awakening, it's so helpful if they can find a person who can then guide them and help them integrate that and help them make sense of what's just happened to them, what that experience has just been. So in the absence of that, there can be a lot of destabilization, sometimes just returning to old patterns and old ways because it looks like it was just a weird moment, or perhaps I just lost it for a second, perhaps I just went mad for a second. It can be explained away, and people can go back into their old patterns. So certainly there can be that. And then I guess there's also the progressive path. So the what we write about in the book is the direct path, and the progressive path is the one that goes through meditation. So if I'd stayed on a transcendental meditation path, maybe I'd have reached the same place. I don't know. But it seemed like that's what I needed to start with in order to have a bit of a shake-up of what's going on. And then I came much more into the direct path because that just seemed to appeal to me. So I think there's, somebody said the other day, there are all roads lead to Rome, really. Yeah. And I think we find the one that works for us, or life brings it to us. Right. I don't know how it works.
Yeah, well, that's Rupert again speaks about the inward facing path and the outward facing path, and it's really interesting that there are many people that follow a particular path. So tell me, in essence, what are you wanting to achieve out of the book?
You know what? The first thing is, whenever I write, I forget people will read it to a large extent. The writing sort of is complete in itself. But beyond that, it's for people to be able to use this as a springboard or a guide, so they find that fundamental okayness for themselves in a reliable way. So it's something that they can go back to. It's something that gives them enough of a language and a framework that they understand what it is they're experiencing, and that they can kind of create their own path in a lot of ways through it. So it's giving people, it's like that old cliche of teaching someone to fish rather than feeding them. It's giving them something that is that they can use to navigate life, but it's not a external toolkit. It's something that helps them pick the external tools in a way that is more coherent for like starting where they are, knowing who they are. And so the book is really just a huge big prompt for people to find that inner peace for themselves inwards, and then work out how to live with it, how to express it.
All right. What about you, Helen? What has been your thoughts around writing the book, and what do you hope for people to get out of it? Just very similar to what Sarah said, I'm sure, but anything else that you want to add on to that?
I think something I've realized, and particularly, in fact, just over the last month or so, is that all of my coaching work, all of my development work, everything I've ever done with clients has been in the pursuit of finding that nicer, easier, happier life. And as you said at the beginning, Rashad, we dress that up in all sorts of other ways of, come to me because I'll help you with your career, come to me because I'll help you with your relationship, whatever the outside label is. Really behind it all, what we're inviting people into is a nicer, easier, happier life. And I mean, gosh, and we say this in the book, if we look at the world right now and we look at the conflict and we look at the state of politics and, gosh, if we could just have more people knowing where that nice, easy, happy life really was, instead of searching for it out there, oh my goodness, we would just have a fundamentally different world. Sorry. I said work there because I was starting to think about, just thinking about workplaces, how much protection there is, how much ego and masks and presenting myself in an acceptable way and not revealing too much about myself because what will people think of me? Oh my goodness, there is so much game playing that goes on in organizations, so much energy spent doing that, creating all of that, when we could be creating amazing solutions for customers and for the world. So I just think there's a huge opportunity to shift our creative power from creating that identity and creating the belief in it and creating all the stories that try and hold it in place into, no, we can just be ourselves, that essential nature. When I say myself, that's what I'm talking about. And then our expression into life can be one that just makes a different impact in the world, has a completely different effect on the people that we spend time with and the work that we do and how we do it. Really bringing things back to being grounded in love instead of grounded in fear, which is what most of the world is running on right now. So if even a drop of that happens as a result of this book, that'd be amazing.
That's wonderful. Do any of you have any other last closing thoughts regarding the book, regarding the journey? Anything else you'd like to add before we wind down?
Well, the only thing I'd say is, like, when we started testing the book, before we tested draft 1 of the book with a group, and one of the guys said, "This isn't a book, this is like a workshop." Or in fact, it turns out to be about a series of about 12 workshops. So one thing we found is that people like progressing through the book with a bit of support. So we have provided like free online resources. Helen recorded a lot of the explorations that are maybe harder to follow. We have a self-study course where people can literally week by week follow through with videos from us and prompts from us and loads of bonus extra kind of all sorts of things. Or they can join a book group, and we're now working with our first official book group, who are about halfway through the book. And one thing they found is that knowing they were meeting with a group to discuss each chapter meant they put a little bit more time, a little bit more energy into exploring, because they didn't want to feel they were letting the group down. They didn't want people to think they hadn't covered the material. So that as a result, we see that the people who are in some kind of support network tend to almost interact with the book like the best way. Doesn't mean that somebody who's completely by themselves won't get exactly the same realization, because it's a realization of who we are. So it's not something from outside. It's not something they need anything for, because it's their self. But yeah, we have found that people in the book groups tend to see, even in the space of just 12 weeks, quite big shifts and quite big long-term shifts compared to what we've seen in other arenas.
That's excellent. I mean, I love the work that you're doing. I totally resonate with everything the two of you are bringing to the world, and I truly believe we need more of this type of discussion and interaction at a very different level as we get into a world that is becoming more and more identified with certain forms, labels, names and identities which are ever shifting goalposts. This sort of melts down everything to one common knowing. So I'm really delighted about that, and having a support group is a very good idea as well. Helen, do you have any last closing thoughts before I ask you guys for details about your website and how to buy your book and be part of your course?
I think I would just add to what Sarah said in terms of you'll read the book how you read the book. So I know people who've read it just as if it was a normal, again, inverted commas, normal book.
Yeah.
You know, not doing the explorations, not inquiring further. And I think there's an element, and we do say this in the book, you know, trust yourself with your own way of interacting with it. Because it might be that you kind of skim read it first time, then you might come back to it and you might dive deeper, you might choose to engage in a course, but it is something that existing readers have already said they're coming back to again and again and again, like just going back to a specific exploration or going back to a specific section as reminders. And yeah, absolutely, we're here to support. We're here. We love helping people recognize this for themselves. So it's a really big invitation to check out the website, get in touch. If there's something that you think you want that you don't think we're providing, then great to hear that. But it's also trust that you'll get what you need from it. And if it's a case of you read it and you put it down for a while, you might just find that you get drawn back to it again, because certainly it seems to me that once something has woken up in us that recognizes there's something deeper available, there's something more fundamental available, the common phrase is that I just feel drawn to it. And so I think if that little spark ignites in anybody, even if it's just from skim reading the book, then most likely you'll find it comes back again and you see it at a deeper level when you re-engage. So I think really trust in your own journey with it and your own process.
Wonderful. So I am guessing, based on this, that the website is Thoughtful Raven. Is that the website that people should go to? So is it Thoughtful Raven? I've got it here, thoughtfulraven.co.za. That's easy name to follow. Yep. Is that the best way to get in touch with you guys as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess we can put it in the show notes, can't we?
Yeah, I'll put that onto the YouTube channel as well, so that people can click on it and access it. So Helen and Sarah, thank you so much for joining me and for a delightful conversation. I wish you tremendous success with all your work, and I'm sure it'll make a huge difference to the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Rashad. Thanks for having us on.